Life has a wicked sense of humor sometimes, the kind that doesn't just make you laugh but leaves you stunned, mouth hanging open, wondering if the universe is playing an elaborate practical joke. That's exactly what happened to me last Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday that decided to become the most extraordinary day of my otherwise meticulously planned life. "You're going to be late again," my husband Noah called from the kitchen, his voice carrying that playful warning tone he'd perfected over our 5 years of marriage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was still upstairs, trying to decide between sensible heels and comfortable flats for the board presentation I'd spent weeks preparing. The Anderson account was mine to lose, and comfort wouldn't matter if I stumbled through my pitch. Says the man who set every clock in the house 10 minutes fast, I shouted back, finally committing to the heels. Power moves required power shoes. Besides, being exactly on time is practically early for a Sullivan. Noah's laughter echoed up the stairwell of our renovated Victorian, the one we'd poured our savings and 3 years of weekends into transforming from a neglected shell into our dream home. His humor was what had drawn me to him at that charity auction 5 years ago, the way he could diffuse tension with a perfectly timed quip, the slight crinkle around his eyes when he smiled genuinely. "Coffee's ready. Black with exactly 1. And a half sugars, just how you pretend to like it," he teased as I descended the stairs, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, already checking morning emails. "I do like it that way," I defended, accepting the travel mug he pressed into my hand, stealing a quick kiss in the process. "And I like you, even when you're insufferable about punctuality." Noah straightened my collar with practiced fingers, his eyes soft as they met mine. At 34, he'd only improved with age, salt and pepper beginning to thread through his dark hair, laugh lines deepening around his mouth. The software engineer I'd fallen for had become a successful tech executive, but he still made my coffee every morning. "Knock 'em dead, Olivia. That account doesn't stand a chance." His confidence in me never wavered, even when mine did. "Dinner at Maison tonight if I land it?" I proposed, already knowing his answer. "I'll book the table for 7. You'll be done celebrating with your team by then." Not if, when. That was Noah, my personal cheerleader, my compass, my safe harbor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I made it out. The door into my sensibly luxurious sedan, Noah's influence on my previously practical car choices, and halfway down our tree-lined street before remembering the portfolio folder I'd deliberately placed by the door so I wouldn't forget it. Even the most competent women in business sometimes need to turn around and face their husband's knowing smirk. "Forgot something?" Noah held the door open, portfolio extended, eyes twinkling with amusement rather than judgment. "Testing your observation skills," I quipped, grabbing the folder. "You passed. Congratulations." "Go make millions," he called after me. "I'll be here plotting world domination via code and contemplating what wine pairs best with corporate conquest." This was our rhythm, our dance. The comfortable routine of two people who had built a life so perfectly in sync that sometimes I wondered if we'd been cosmically designed for each other. The thought made me smile as I finally hit the highway, mentally rehearsing my pitch for the 3rd time that morning. The Anderson account presentation went flawlessly. By noon, I'd secured a $2.5 million contract for our marketing firm, received congratulatory handshakes from partners who had once questioned promoting a woman to senior management, and fielded 17 text messages from Noah ranging from, "How's she, my corporate warrior?" to, "Should I wear the blue suit or the charcoal one tonight?" followed by selfies in both options. I chose the charcoal. It brought out his eyes. By 5 o'clock, the celebratory office champagne had been popped, speeches given, and strategy meetings for implementation already scheduled. I slipped away from my team's continued revelry to freshen up before meeting Noah. The woman in the bathroom mirror looked triumphant, her carefully applied morning makeup still holding strong, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, her eyes bright with the thrill of victory. "You did it, Sullivan," I whispered to myself, a childhood habit I'd never quite shaken. My father had taught me to acknowledge my wins, to allow myself a moment of pride before moving on to the next challenge. The drive to Maison took 20 minutes in evening traffic. Noah had texted that he was already there, having left work early to ensure our table was perfect. As I pulled into the restaurant's valet line, I felt a flutter of anticipation. These moments, the celebrations, the shared victories, were what made our partnership work. We championed each other's successes as if they were our own. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Sullivan, your husband is waiting at your usual table. May I say congratulations? He mentioned your big win. Today." "Thank you, Pierre," I smiled, handing off my coat. "Is he behaving himself?" "Perfectly, as always," Pierre assured me with a conspiratorial wink. "Though he did request the 98 Bordeaux be decanted 10 minutes ago. He said you'd appreciate the timing." Noah and his precision. He knew exactly how long the wine needed to breathe before I arrived. It was these small attentions to detail that made me fall in love with him daily. I followed Pierre through the dimly lit restaurant, navigating between tables of Chicago's business elite, nodding to familiar faces. Maison wasn't just expensive. It was exclusive, the kind of place where reservations were inherited like family heirlooms. Noah and I had our table only because I'd once salvaged the owner's daughter's wedding after a PR catastrophe involving the groom and a unfortunately timed viral video. I saw Noah before he saw me, his head bent slightly, studying the menu he'd memorized years ago, the charcoal suit fitting his athletic frame perfectly. He looked up as if sensing my presence, and his face transformed with that smile that still, after all these years, made my heart skip. He stood as I approached, old-school manners his mother had drilled into him. "There she is," he said, pride evident in his voice. "The woman who just closed the biggest account of the quarter." "The year," I corrected, accepting his kiss on the cheek. "Let's not undersell my magnificence." "Never." He held my chair, waited for me to sit, then reclaimed his own. "I ordered the truffle appetizer already. Hope that's okay." "Perfect." I reached for the wine he'd already poured, taking an appreciative sip. "You decanted this exactly 13 minutes ago, didn't you?" 12 and a half, but who's counting? Noah's eyes crinkled. "Tell me everything. Did Anderson do that thing? Where he pretends to be uncertain just to see if you'll offer a discount?" I launched into the story, describing the presentation, the questions, the moment I knew we had them. Noah listened with genuine interest, asking the right questions, laughing at my impression of Anderson's notoriously furrowed brow. This was us at our best, sharing, celebrating, building each other up. Our appetizers arrived, followed by perfectly seared scallops for me, and the restaurant's famous beef Wellington for Noah. The conversation flowed easily from work to friends to the weekend plans we'd been debating. "So I was thinking," Noah said, signaling for another bottle of wine, "about that trip to Barcelona we've been postponing. What if we finally book it for our anniversary? 6 weeks from now, perfect weather, that little boutique hotel overlooking the Gothic Quarter, the one with the rooftop pool." I felt a tingle of excitement. We'd been talking about Spain for 2 years, always finding reasons to delay. The very one. I may have put a tentative hold on their best suite. His expression was both mischievous and hopeful. "Cancelable, of course, if you've somehow scheduled a global marketing takeover that week." I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with a calendar alert. I glanced down, expecting to see a reminder about tomorrow's follow-up meeting. Instead, I saw Noah, dinner Y, Jake, and new GF. 8 p.m. a Mason. I looked up, confusion clouding my celebration buzz. Wait, are we meeting Jake tonight? Here? Noah's expression shifted to one of apologetic realization. Oh damn, I completely forgot to tell you with all the excitement about your presentation. Jake called this morning. He's been seeing someone new, wanted us to meet her. I figured, since we were going to be here anyway. He looked genuinely contrite. I should have mentioned it earlier. We can cancel if you're too tired after your big day. Jake was Noah's best friend since college. Brilliant, slightly neurotic, perpetually unlucky in love despite being objectively attractive and successful. His romantic disasters had provided entertainment at many of our dinner parties. No, it's fine, I assured Noah, pushing down a slight twinge of disappointment that our celebration would now include others. I'm curious about any woman brave enough to date Jake after hearing his dating history. He seems really excited about this one, Noah said, checking his watch. They should be here there they are. I turned to follow his gaze toward the restaurant entrance, expecting to see Jake's familiar lanky frame accompanied by his latest romantic interest. The maitre d' was indeed leading Jake through the restaurant, his hand resting lightly on the back of a stunning woman with copper hair cascading over her shoulders in perfect waves. But it wasn't Jake or his date that caused my wine glass to slip from my fingers, splashing Bordeaux across the pristine white tablecloth. It was the man following closely behind them, tall, distinguished, with steel gray hair and the same confident stride that had once made my 22-year-old heart race uncontrollably. Olivia! Noah's concerned voice seemed to come from far away. Are you okay? I couldn't answer, couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the approaching party. The universe's practical joke was revealing its punchline, and it was aimed squarely at me. The man looked up then, his eyes meeting mine across the restaurant. I watched recognition dawn on his face, followed by the same shock I knew must be written across mine. Richard, I whispered, the name feeling foreign on my tongue, after 15 years of deliberately not saying it. You know Jake's girlfriend's father? Noah asked, dabbing at the spilled wine with his napkin, completely missing the seismic shift happening in our perfectly orderly lives. The maitre d' reached our table, Jake beaming with anticipation. Noah, Olivia, this is Sophia, he said, his hand proudly on the copper-haired woman's shoulder. And her parents decided to join us last minute. They were in town for a medical conference. This is Dr. Richard Harmon and his wife Elizabeth. Richard's wife, a elegant blonde I'd never seen before, smiled politely, but Richard himself remained frozen, his eyes locked with mine in a silent acknowledgement of our shared past. Actually, I said finally, finding my voice as I extended, my hand with practiced professional calm that belied the chaos erupting inside me. Richard and I are already acquainted. Old friends, Richard added smoothly, his voice exactly as I remembered it. Deep, assured, with that slight East Coast accent that had once made everything he said sound so authoritative to my young ears. Noah, ever perceptive, caught the undercurrent. Immediately. His eyebrows raised slightly as he looked between us, questions forming behind his eyes that I knew I'd have to answer later. Well, Jake said, oblivious to the tension suddenly electrifying the air around our table. That's great. Should make dinner less awkward, right? If only he knew the magnificent irony of his statement. My husband's best friend was dating the daughter of the man who had once asked me to marry him, the man whose proposal I'd rejected 15 years ago in favor of pursuing my career. The man whose heart I'd broken so thoroughly that he'd left Chicago and never looked back, until now apparently, with a wife and a daughter who was dating my husband's best friend. The universe wasn't just playing a practical joke, it was performing an entire comedy routine at my expense. Let's order another bottle of wine, I suggested, meeting Noah's questioning gaze with a look that promised explanations later. I think we're going to need it. As the waiter cleared my spilled drink and Richard settled into the chair directly across from me, I felt the carefully constructed narrative of my life begin to unravel at the edges. The past I'd neatly packed away was suddenly sitting at my celebration dinner, making small talk with my husband about the Chicago weather while his wife admired the restaurant's architecture. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile that I hoped looked more genuine than it felt. This evening had just become a high-stakes performance, and I needed to be flawless. The irony wasn't lost on me. Hours ago, I'd been celebrating my greatest professional victory, and now I was facing what might be my greatest personal challenge. Noah's hand found mine under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Whatever happened next, at least I had him, my partner, my safe harbor in what had suddenly become very stormy seas. So, Jake said brightly, raising his water glass in an impromptu toast, to new beginnings and old friends. I raised my newly filled wine glass mechanically, meeting Richard's eyes over the rim. His expression was unreadable, professional, composed, but I knew him well enough once to recognize the tension in his jaw, the slight stiffness in his shoulders. He remembered everything too. The waiter's arrival with menus provided a momentary reprieve from the suffocating tension. I busied myself studying entree options I'd long ago memorized, grateful for any distraction from the surreal tableau unfolding around me. So, Olivia? Sophia's voice cut through my desperate menu contemplation. Jake tells me you're in marketing? My dad always said you were brilliant at whatever you set your mind to. My head snapped up. She knew. Richard had told his daughter about me. Dad's been following your career, Sophia continued, seemingly oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped. He keeps that profile Wall Street Journal did on you last year. Says you're exactly where he always knew you'd be. I felt Noah's attention, sharpened beside me, his hand still holding mine, but now with a questioning pressure. Richard cleared his throat. I follow the careers of many promising former students, he said smoothly, addressing the table but looking directly at me. Olivia was one of my most talented research assistants during my visiting professorship at Northwestern. The simplified version of our history hung in the air between us. Yes, I had been his research assistant, initially. What had followed was a whirlwind romance that had consumed 2 years of my early 20s, ending with his proposal and my refusal, choosing career over what he'd presented as an ultimatum. I didn't know you'd taught at Northwestern, Noah said, his voice neutral but eyes watchful. Just for 2 years, Richard replied, before accepting the position at Johns Hopkins, ancient history now. 15 years, I said without thinking, then immediately regretted the precision of my memory. Elizabeth, Richard's wife, tilted her head slightly. You have an excellent memory for dates, Olivia. Part of the job, I replied with a professional smile. Details matter in marketing. That's what attracted me to Sophia, Jake interjected, clearly trying to steer the conversation to safer waters. She remembers everything. Comes with being an attorney, I guess. Corporate law, Sophia clarified, her smile warm as she looked at Jake. Nothing as exciting as Dad's medical breakthroughs or Olivia's marketing campaigns. Sophia graduated. Top of her class at Harvard Law, Richard said, paternal pride evident in his voice. She could have joined any firm in the country, but she wanted to return to Chicago. Family ties, Sophia explained, reaching over to squeeze her father's arm affectionately. Mom and Dad finally moved back here last month after Dad accepted the research position at Chicago Medical. It felt like the right time for all of us to come home. Home. Richard was moving back to Chicago. This wasn't a brief visit. This was a permanent return to the city we'd once explored together, where we'd built and destroyed a relationship that had altered the course of both our lives. The medical community here is fortunate to have you back, Noah said diplomatically. Your work on cardiac regeneration is groundbreaking. I follow the research updates. Richard looked genuinely surprised. You're familiar with my research? Noah reads everything, I explained, finding my footing and talking about my husband, solid ground in shifting sands. He's annoyingly well-informed about virtually every subject, makes arguing with him impossible. Not impossible, Noah corrected with a grin. Just data-driven. And yes, cardiac research interests me since my father's heart attack 2 years ago. Your papers on stem cell applications were particularly fascinating. And just like that, they were off. Noah and Richard diving into a detailed discussion of medical innovations, finding unexpected common ground while Elizabeth occasionally added insights from her background in medical administration. I watched, in a daze as my past and present collided, meshing in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Beside me, Sophia and Jake had fallen into their own conversation, their affection for each other evident in their body language and shared smiles. Jake mentioned, "You just landed a major account today," Sophia said, turning to include me. "Congratulations!" "Thank you," I replied automatically. "It was a team effort. Dad always said you undersold your achievements," she noted with a friendly smile. He was right. I forced myself to maintain eye contact with her rather than glance at Richard. "Your father remembers a very young version of me. I've changed considerably since then." "We all have," Richard interjected, clearly having monitored our conversation despite his discussion with Noah. "That's the privilege of time and experience." His eyes held mine for a beat too long, communicating something I wasn't ready to decipher. The arrival of our entrees provided another welcome interruption. As we ate, the conversation mercifully shifted to neutral topics: Chicago's restaurant scene, upcoming exhibits at the Art Institute, the perpetually disappointing performance of the city's sports teams. I found myself watching Richard surreptitiously throughout the meal. The years had been kind to him. At 52, he carried his age with the same confidence he'd possessed at 37 when we'd met. His hair had silvered, lines had deepened around his eyes, but he still commanded attention. With his presence alone, Elizabeth caught me looking once and smiled with surprising warmth. "Richard tells me you were one of his most promising students," she said. "He always speaks highly of the mark you've made in your field." The gracious comment from the woman, who had married the man I'd rejected, caught me off guard. "That's kind of him," I managed, wondering exactly what version of our history Richard had shared with his wife. "Not kind," Richard corrected. "Accurate. Olivia was destined for exceptional things. I'm pleased to see that prediction fulfilled." There was no bitterness in his tone, no lingering resentment, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement that further disoriented me. Had our past meant so little? Or had he simply processed it in healthier ways than I had, tucking it away rather than locking it in a vault and throwing away the key? "And what about you two?" Elizabeth asked, turning to Noah and me with genuine interest. "Jake tells us you've been married 5 years?" 5 years next month," Noah confirmed, his arm settling comfortably around the back of my chair. "Best decision I ever made was pursuing this woman until she finally agreed to have coffee with me." "You make it sound like you had to convince me," I protested, finding comfort in our familiar banter. "As I recall, you asked once, very politely, and I said yes immediately." After ignoring my obvious interest for 3 charity events, Noah countered with a grin. "I was beginning to think I was invisible." "You were hard to miss," I admitted, remembering how Noah had stood out in a room full of Chicago's elite, not because of wealth or status, but because of his authentic presence in a sea of practiced personas. I was just focused on work. "Some things never change," Richard murmured, so quietly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "We're planning a trip to Barcelona for our anniversary," Noah continued, either missing or choosing to ignore Richard's comment. "Olivia's been promising to show me her favorite spots from when she studied abroad." "The summer program at Universitat de Barcelona?" Richard asked, and I nodded, surprised he remembered that detail from conversations we'd had a lifetime ago. "Proposed there?" Richard told the table casually, gesturing to Elizabeth. The Gothic quarter at sunset. Not particularly original, but effective. Elizabeth laughed, her hand covering his. He'd planned this elaborate speech, then forgot every word the moment he went down on one knee. Just kept saying, "Marry me," over and over until I put him out of his misery and said yes. I felt a strange disconnection watching Richard's hand entwine with his wife's, hearing about a proposal in the same location where he had once asked me the same question. He'd been equally tongue-tied then too, his usual eloquence deserting him in that crucial moment. Dad's always been better with medical terminology than romance, Sophia teased affectionately. Mom saved him from a lifetime of awkward declarations? The best partners do that, Noah observed, his thumb tracing small circles on my shoulder. They fill in our gaps, strengthen our weaknesses. Indeed they do, Richard agreed, his eyes finding mine briefly before returning to his wife. The idea right partnership changes everything. Dessert arrived, chocolate soufflés and espresso for the table, along with the inevitable awkward dance of who would cover the check. Noah insisted since we'd chosen the restaurant, but Richard countered that they had crashed our celebration dinner. They eventually agreed to split it, their credit cards laid down simultaneously in a show of equally matched generosity. As the evening finally drew to a close, we stood in the restaurant foyer exchanging pleasantries and contact information. Jake clearly expected this blended dinner to be the first of many, his arm around Sophia's waist, his expression hopeful as he suggested brunch that weekend. We'd love to, Noah responded before I could formulate an excuse. But check with Olivia first. Her schedule's the complicated one. All eyes turned to me expectantly. Saying no would raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer. Saying yes meant willingly stepping back into Richard's orbit after 15 years of carefully maintained distance. I'll check my calendar, I hedged, buying time. We may have plans with my sister this weekend. Actually, Richard interjected smoothly, Elizabeth, and I have a hospital fundraiser Saturday evening. Perhaps next weekend would work better for everyone. Relief flooded through me at the temporary reprieve. Next weekend should work, I agreed, knowing I had 10 days to figure out how to navigate this impossible situation. Noah shook hands with Richard, exchanged warm hugs with Jake and Sophia, and accepted Elizabeth's kiss on the cheek with his usual easy charm. I followed suit mechanically, my body operating on autopilot while my mind raced through implications and contingencies. When Richard took my hand for our goodbye, his grip was professional, impersonal, but his eyes held mine with an intensity that transported me back 15 years in an instant. It was good to see you, Olivia, he said formally. You've built an impressive life. Thank you, I replied, equally formal. So have you. Something flickered across his face. A question, perhaps, or a memory, but it was gone before I could interpret it. He released my hand and stepped back, returning to Elizabeth's side with practiced ease. We parted ways outside the restaurant, two couples and one pair heading in different directions into the Chicago night. Noah was uncharacteristically quiet as the valet brought our car around, opening my door with the same consideration he always showed, but with a thoughtfulness in his expression that told me he was processing the evening's revelations. It wasn't until we were halfway home, the city lights reflecting off the windshield, that he finally broke the silence. So, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Richard Harmon is more than your former professor, isn't he? The question hung between us, demanding truth after an evening built on careful omissions and strategic phrasing. I turned to look at my husband's profile, the man who had never once given me reason to doubt his love or question his loyalty. He deserved nothing less than complete honesty. Yes, I admitted, the single word releasing 15 years of carefully contained history. Richard was my first serious relationship. We were together for almost 2 years. He asked me to marry him, and I said no. Noah nodded slowly, digesting. this information as he navigated through a yellow light. And now his daughter is dating Jake, and we're all having dinner together like one big happy extended family. Apparently, I agreed, the absurdity of the situation hitting me anew. Noah was quiet for another block before a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Life has a hell of a sense of humor, doesn't it? The tension that had been building in my chest began to dissolve at his response. This was why I loved this man, his ability to find humor in chaos, to approach complications with curiosity rather than jealousy. It really does, I agreed, relief coloring my voice. I'm sorry I never told you about him. It was a long time ago, and it didn't end well. You don't owe me a catalog of your past relationships, Liv, Noah assured me, reaching for my hand across the console. Though, I'll admit, watching my wife freeze like a deer in headlights when her ex walked in with his wife, daughter, and her boyfriend who happens to be my best friend. That's a new one. A laugh escaped me, unbidden. Just imagine how I felt. I thought I was having a stroke for a second. You looked like it, Noah confirmed, chuckling. When you dropped that glass of very expensive wine, I thought I might need to implement that CPR knowledge I've been brushing up on through Richard's research papers. We both dissolved into laughter then, the release of tension, the acknowledgement of the absurdity, the shared understanding of a situation that was both comical and complicated. Is this going to be weird? Noah asked finally as we pulled into our driveway, the question both simple and profoundly complex. I considered it honestly, thinking of Richard's formal handshake and piercing gaze, of Sophia's innocent comments, about her father following my career, of Elizabeth's gracious warmth. Probably, I admitted. But weird doesn't have to mean bad. It's just unexpected. Noah turned off the engine and shifted to face me fully. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice 15 years ago. Choosing career over marriage? I asked, surprised by his assessment. Choosing your path over someone else's expectations, he clarified. If you'd married him then, you wouldn't be the Olivia I fell in love with now. His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket on a cold night, securing and comforting. Noah understood me in ways I sometimes didn't understand myself. Have I told you today that I love you? I asked, leaning across the console to kiss him softly. You have, he confirmed against my lips, but I don't mind hearing it again. As we walked up the path to our front door, his arm around my waist, I felt steadier than I had since seeing Richard across that restaurant. Whatever complications lay ahead, I had Noah beside me, my partner, my safe harbor, the man who loved me not despite my choices, but because of them. Behind our front door lay the life we'd built together, the photographs chronicling our journey, the furniture we'd argued over and compromised on, the small everyday evidences of our shared existence. It was real and solid and good. The past might have unexpectedly crashed into our present tonight, but it didn't have the power to reshape our future unless we gave it that power. Noah yawned as he hung his keys on the hook by the door. What a night, he commented, loosening his tie. Not exactly the celebration dinner we planned. No, I agreed, slipping off my heels with a sigh of relief. But memorable, certainly. He laughed, heading toward the kitchen. Want some tea before bed? I have a feeling we both could use something calming. That would be perfect, I replied, following him. As Noah filled the kettle, moving through our kitchen with familiar ease, I leaned against the counter and watched him. This was my reality. This man, this home, this life we'd created together. Richard was a ghost from my past who had unexpectedly materialized, but he didn't belong in this space we'd built. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out to find a text from an unknown number. Olivia, it was surprising but good to see you tonight. Some conversations are best had directly rather than through our children's relationship. Coffee next week? Richard. I stared at the screen, 1,000 responses running through my mind. I could ignore it. I could politely decline. I could agree. And set boundaries. "Everything okay?" Noah asked, noticing my expression as he set 2 mugs on the counter. I handed him my phone without hesitation. "Richard texted me." Noah read the message, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned. "Are you going to meet him?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Would it bother you if I did?" He returned my phone, his eyes meeting mine directly. "I trust you completely, and I understand wanting closure with the past, especially when it's suddenly sitting across the dinner table from us. Whatever you decide, I support you." His unwavering faith in me, in us, settled something inside me that had been churning since that first moment of recognition in the restaurant. "I'll think about it," I said, tucking the phone away without responding. Right now, I'd rather focus on us this night. The fact that I landed the Anderson account despite the universe throwing a cosmic curveball at my celebration dinner. Noah's smile returned, pride replacing contemplation in his eyes. That's my corporate warrior, always keeping her eyes on the prize. As we sat at our kitchen island, sipping tea and decompressing from the evening's revelations, I found myself thinking about paths not taken and choices that shape destinies. 15 years ago, I'd chosen ambition over what Richard had presented, as love combined with compromise. That choice had led me here, to Noah, to success on my own terms, to a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. I didn't regret it for a second. Whatever Richard wanted to discuss over coffee would have to wait for tomorrow's considerations. Tonight belonged to Noah, to us, to the life we'd built together. The past might have come calling, but it would have to leave a message. The present had my full attention. Morning arrived with the persistent chime of my alarm, dragging me from fitful dreams where I'd been trapped in an endless dinner party, Richard and Noah discussing my career prospects while I struggled to speak. I reached for my phone, silencing the alarm with a practiced swipe, and found myself staring at Richard's unanswered text from the night before. Outside our bedroom window, Chicago was already bustling. Car horns, distant L train rumblings, the percussion of a city fully awake while I lay contemplating how quickly life could complicate itself. "You've been staring at that phone for 5 minutes," Noah observed from the doorway, already dressed in running clothes, a mug of coffee in his outstretched hand. "The text won't answer itself, you know." I accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "I'm formulating a strategic response." At 6:30 in the morning? Impressive dedication to awkward social situations. His tone was light, but his eyes searched mine. "You okay? Really?" I took a fortifying sip before answering. "I'm fine, just processing." It's not every day your past and present collide in spectacular fashion. Noah sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding mine. "For what it's worth, I thought you handled it gracefully. Much better than I would have if my ex suddenly appeared as Jake's potential mother-in-law." The mental image made me snort coffee. Now that would be a plot twist. "Exactly," he said, squeezing my hand before standing. "I'm heading out for a quick 5 miles. Want to join me? Running sometimes helps sort through mental clutter." "I think better in heels and boardrooms than in sneakers and sweat," I declined. "Besides, I need to prepare for the Anderson implementation meeting." Noah nodded, understanding as always that work remained my steadiest anchor during personal turbulence. "Dinner tonight, just us? No surprise exes or future in-laws?" "Perfect," I agreed, already mentally calculating how to respond to Richard's message before my 9 a.m. meeting. After Noah left, I showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing a charcoal pencil skirt and crimson blouse that always bolstered my confidence. Standing before the bathroom mirror, applying mascara with practiced precision, I finally allowed myself to fully process the previous night's revelations. Richard was back in Chicago, permanently, with a wife and a daughter who was dating my husband's best friend. The carefully constructed firewall between my past and present had not just been breached, it had been obliterated. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Richard's text. Professional coffee is acceptable. Tuesday, 2 p.m., Intelligentsia. On Randolph. 30 minutes. Setting clear boundaries seemed prudent. I hit send before I could overthink it, then immediately turned my attention to work emails. The Anderson implementation would require focused attention, and I refused to let personal complications derail my professional momentum. By the time I reached the office, Richard had replied with a simple, "See you then." No pleasantries, no attempts to extend the time frame. At least we were still fluent in each other's communication styles. My assistant, Mia, greeted me with her usual efficiency, tablet in hand. The teams assembled in Conference Room C, the Anderson implementation timeline is drafted, and Jake called twice already this morning. I nearly stumbled at Jake's name. Jake? Did he say what he wanted? Just to talk to you when you have a minute. Said it wasn't urgent. Mia's expression was curious but professional. Should I call him back? No, I'll handle it, I replied, maintaining my composure while internally considering what Jake might want to discuss. Had Sophia mentioned something about Richard and me? Did Jake somehow sense the undercurrents at dinner? The implementation meeting provided welcome distraction. For 2 hours, I immersed myself in strategies, timelines, and deliverables. The familiar territory of marketing campaigns supplanting thoughts of personal complications. It wasn't until I returned to my office that the real world intruded again, in the form of Jake waiting by my door, his lanky frame leaning against the wall with characteristic casualness. The conquering hero returns, he greeted me with a grin. Noah told me about landing the Anderson account. Major congrats. Thanks, I replied, unlocking my office door and gesturing him inside. Sorry about the celebration dinner getting hijacked. Last night. Jake followed me in, settling into one of my visitor chairs with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been in our lives for years. Are you kidding? It was perfect timing. I've been wanting you guys to meet Sophia and her parents. Being in town was a bonus. I arranged my expression into one of polite interest as I took my seat. She seems lovely. How long have you been seeing each other? Almost 3 months. Jake admitted, looking slightly sheepish. I know that's longer than I usually wait to introduce someone, but this feels different, Liv. She's different. Something in his tone made me pause. Jake's romantic history was a running joke in our social circle, brilliant in business, hopelessly inept in love. Yet here he was, looking almost vulnerable as he spoke about Sophia. Different how? I asked, genuinely curious despite my personal complications. She's challenging, Jake said after a moment's consideration. Not in a difficult way, but intellectually. She doesn't just agree with me to keep things pleasant. She makes me think, reconsider my positions. His expression softened. And she laughs at my jokes, even the terrible ones. A woman of questionable taste, then, I teased, falling into our usual banter despite the surreal circumstances. Jake laughed, then grew more serious. There's something else. Her dad, Dr. Harmon, he mentioned knowing you from Northwestern, but I got the feeling there was more to it. Sophia said he follows your career, keeps articles about you. I kept my expression neutral through years of professional practice. We worked closely during his visiting professorship. Academic mentors often track their students' careers. Jake studied me with uncharacteristic intensity. Okay, but here's the weird part. When I mentioned to Sophia that my best friend was married to Olivia Sullivan née Wilson, she got this strange look. Said her dad had almost married an Olivia once, years ago before he met her mom. The floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath me. Richard had told his daughter about us, about the proposal. I wondered what version of our story Sophia had grown up, hearing what narrative Richard had constructed from the wreckage of our ending. Small world, I managed, neither confirming nor denying. Jake leaned forward, dropping all pretense. Liv? Was Richard Harmon more than your professor? I considered deflecting, maintaining the carefully edited version of history I'd presented at dinner. But Jake was Noah's oldest friend, practically family. And clearly, pieces of the truth were already circulating. Yes, I admitted, echoing my confession to Noah the previous night. We were together for nearly 2 years when I was in my 20s. It ended when I chose my career path over his marriage proposal. Jake let out a low whistle. Holy shit. So, my girlfriend's dad is your ex-boyfriend? That appears to be the case, I confirmed, the absurdity hitting me anew through Jake's blunt summary. And now we're all having brunch together next weekend. Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he shared with Noah when processing something unexpected. That's complicated. An understatement, I agreed, surprising myself with a small laugh. Life has a twisted sense of humor. Jake joined my laughter, the tension in the room dissipating slightly. Noah knows, right? Please tell me you told... Noah? Of course I told Noah, I assured him. Last night after dinner, I paused, still marveling at my husband's reaction. Understanding. More than I probably deserved. That's Noah, Jake nodded, unsurprised. Most secure man I've ever known. Probably helps that he's madly in love with you. The feeling's mutual, I said softly, gratitude for my husband washing through me again. Jake's expression turned thoughtful. So what now? Do we just pretend this isn't epically awkward and proceed with group outings? Because I really like Sophia, Liv. I think this could be serious. The implications settled over me like a weight. If Jake and Sophia continued their relationship, Richard would become a permanent fixture in our extended social circle. The past wouldn't remain a single uncomfortable dinner. It would become a recurring feature of my present. We're adults, I said finally, speaking as much to myself as to Jake. We can navigate complicated social dynamics for the sake of people we care about. Jake studied me for a moment. You're really okay with this? Because if it's too weird, You can... What? I interrupted gently. Stop seeing a woman you clearly care about because her father and I have history? That would be ridiculous. Relief washed over his features. Thanks, Liv. That means a lot. He stood, checking his watch. I should get back to the office. Quarterly reports wait for no man. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I think. Dr. Harmon still respects you a lot. When Sophia mentioned you might be at dinner, he seemed, I don't know, pleased maybe? Not angry or bitter? The comment stayed with me long after Jake left, a pebble creating ripples across the surface of my thoughts. Why would Richard be pleased to see me after how things had ended? Our parting had been painful, full of accusations and disappointments. I had chosen my career over what he'd considered a perfect future together. He had called me cold, calculating, incapable of real love. I had called him controlling, dismissive of my ambitions. Yet he had followed my career, kept articles about me, spoken to his daughter about me with apparent respect. It didn't align with the narrative I'd constructed about our ending. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, professional obligations providing welcome structure amid personal uncertainty. By the time I headed home, Chicago's early summer evening was in full glory. Golden light bathing the buildings, pedestrians lingering on sidewalks, the promise of warmth after months of brutal winter. Noah was already home when I arrived, the scent of garlic and rosemary greeting me as I opened the door. I found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, wine open and breathing on the counter. You cooked, I observed, kissing him hello before pouring myself a glass. Figured we deserved something better than takeout after last night's excitement. He replied, checking something in the oven. How was your day? Process any existential relationship complications? I took a sip of wine, savoring its complexity. Jake came to see me. Apparently, Sophia knows about Richard and me. At least she knows her father almost married someone named Olivia years ago. Noah turned to face me, leaning against the counter. That must have been an interesting conversation. Jake was concerned it might be too awkward for everyone. I explained, running a finger around the rim of my glass. I assured him we're all adults who can handle complicated social dynamics. Are we, though? Noah asked with a hint of amusement. Because I distinctly remember you dropping an extremely expensive glass of wine when you saw Richard. A momentary lapse in composure, I defended, feeling my cheeks warm. I've scheduled coffee with Richard on Tuesday to clear the air. Noah raised an eyebrow. Tuesday, huh? That was fast. Better to address it directly than let it fester, I reasoned. Besides, if Jake and Sophia continue seeing each other, Richard's going to be around. We might as well establish some ground rules. Practical as always, Noah observed, returning to his cooking. Want to talk about what you're feeling about all this? The question was gentle, without pressure, a hallmark of Noah's emotional intelligence. While I naturally retreated into logic and planning, he always created space for feelings I sometimes struggled to acknowledge. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted, taking another sip of wine. Surprised, obviously. Uncomfortable with the collision of past and present. But also curious, I suppose. About? Noah prompted, stirring something that smelled divine. About Richard's life now. About the choices he made after we ended. About how he views what happened between us after 15 years. I paused, considering. When relationships end badly, we create narratives that help us process the pain. I've carried my version for 15 years. I'm curious about his. Noah nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Closure is underrated. It's not about closure, I countered automatically, then stopped as I recognized the defensive note in my voice. Or maybe it is, partly. I've never really examined how that relationship shaped me. Well, you've got a golden opportunity now, Noah pointed out, serving our dinner with practiced movements. Just don't let his narrative rewrite yours. You made the right choice for you, regardless of how he frames it now. As always, Noah had cut straight to the heart of my unspoken concern, that somehow meeting Richard again would make me question the path I'd chosen, the life I'd built, the woman I'd become. Over dinner, we shifted to safer topics, Noah's latest project at work, my plans for the Anderson campaign, the upcoming trip to Barcelona we were still debating. The rhythm of our shared life reasserted itself, comforting in its familiarity. It wasn't until later, as we cleared the dishes together in the companionable silence of partners who didn't need constant conversation, that Noah returned to the subject. I got a text from Jake earlier, he mentioned casually. He wants to take us boating on Saturday. Him, Sophia, us, and a couple other friends. No parents this time. The invitation hung between us, our first opportunity to socialize with Jake, and Sophia without the complication of Richard's presence. A chance to establish a relationship with them as a couple, independent of my history with her father. That sounds fun, I said cautiously, as long as Jake remembers that a boat isn't actually a floating bar. Noah laughed, recalling Jake's notorious nautical misadventures. He promises he's matured. Apparently, Sophia is an experienced sailor. Her family had a place on Lake Michigan when she was growing up. Another unexpected connection. Richard and I had spent weekends sailing on Lake Michigan during our relationship. Had he taught his daughter to sail on the same waters where we had once mapped our future? I'll believe Jake's maturity when I see it, I replied, focusing on the humor rather than the uncanny parallels. But yes, let's go. It would be good to get to know Sophia better. Noah studied me for a moment. You sure you're comfortable with that? It's okay if it's too weird. I'm sure, I answered, more decisively than I felt. We can't avoid Jake's Girlfriend forever. Especially if things are getting serious. Better to build our own relationship with her. Separate from my history with her father. Ever the strategist. Noah smiled, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind as I loaded. The dishwasher. I love that about you, you know. The way you approach challenges head-on instead of avoiding them. His words warmed me, a reminder that the traits Richard had once criticized, my pragmatism, my directness, my clear-eyed assessment of situations were precisely what Noah valued most. Saturday morning dawned clear and perfect, the kind of early summer day that made Chicago's brutal winters seem like a fair exchange. We met Jake and Sophia at Burnham Harbor, where Jake kept his modest sailboat, a 30-footer he'd acquired during a particularly successful quarter 3 years ago. Sophia spotted us first, waving enthusiastically from the dock. She looked different outside the formal restaurant setting, younger somehow in denim shorts and a Northwestern sweatshirt, her copper hair pulled into a casual ponytail. Standing beside her, Jake appeared more relaxed than I'd seen him in months, one arm draped comfortably around her shoulders. "You made it," he called as we approached. I was betting Olivia would find a last-minute work emergency. I considered. Di admitted with a smile. But Noah hid my laptop. A necessary precaution, Noah agreed, shaking Jake's hand and accepting Sophia's quick hug. Beautiful day for sailing. Perfect conditions, Sophia confirmed, her enthusiasm evident. Steady winds from the southwest, clear skies, moderate temperature. Dad would say it's a textbook day for teaching someone new. The casual reference to Richard hung briefly in the air, before Jake smoothly interjected. The others canceled, unfortunately. Marcus has some stomach bug, and Emma's flight from New York got delayed. Just the 4 of us today. I wasn't sure if this was better or worse. Fewer people meant less buffer conversation, but also fewer witnesses to any awkward moments that might arise. Sophia helped us board with confident movements that spoke of years of experience. Dad had us on boats before we could walk, she explained, securing a line with practiced ease. Mom always teased that he loved sailing more than medicine. My mind flashed to Richard's focused concentration as he'd adjusted the sails. The way the wind had tousled his dark hair, not yet gray then, how he'd looked completely in his element on the water in a way he never quite did in hospital corridors or research labs. Your father's a talented sailor, I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. I'm not surprised he passed that love on to you. Sophia beamed at the comment, clearly pleased by the connection. He says it's the perfect balance of science and art. Understanding the physics of wind and water while intuitively feeling the boat's response. It was exactly what Richard had said to me years ago when I'd asked why he loved sailing so much. The verbatim repetition was jarring, a ghost of conversation echoing across 15 years. Noah, sensing my discomfort, smoothly changed the subject. Jake tells me you're in corporate law, Sophia. How did you end up in that field? The question successfully redirected the conversation as Jake prepared the boat for departure. Sophia explained her path through law school and into her current position at a prestigious Chicago firm, her intelligence and passion evident as she described her work. Once we were underway, the physical demands of sailing provided welcome distraction. Jake and Sophia worked together with surprising coordination, giving Noah and me simple tasks that kept us engaged without requiring expertise we didn't possess. The lake stretched before us, Chicago's skyline receding as we moved further from shore. There was something freeing about the distance, about leaving the complications of land behind for a few hours of sun, wind, and water. With the boat on a steady course, we settled into more casual conversation, sharing drinks and the lunch Sophia had packed. I observed her interactions with Jake, noting their easy rapport, the way they anticipated each other's needs, the shared glances that communicated without words. How did you two meet? I asked eventually, genuine curiosity overcoming my reservations. Professional networking event, Jake answered, grinning. I was bored out of my mind until this gorgeous redhead started challenging everything I said about market projections. He was using outdated models, Sophia explained with an affectionate eye roll. Someone had to correct him before he embarrassed himself further. Love at first argument, Jake concluded, squeezing her hand. Just like you and Noah, actually. Didn't you meet at some charity thing where you disagreed about investment strategies? Renewable energy portfolios, Noah confirmed, smiling at the memory. Olivia systematically dismantled my entire approach in front of Chicago's wealthiest donors. It was constructive criticism, I defended, remembering how Noah had sought me out afterward, not to challenge my assessment, but to continue the conversation, genuinely interested in my perspective. It was brutal, Noah corrected good-naturedly. And impressive. I knew then I needed to know the woman who could think so clearly under pressure. Sophia was watching our exchange with interest. Dad always says the best relationships start with intellectual connection. He told me once he knew Mom was special when she corrected his cardiac research methodology during their first date. Another parallel that seemed too coincidental. Richard and I had connected first over research methodology, my questions about his approach sparking a discussion that had extended long past the scheduled research meeting. Your parents seem well matched, I observed carefully. How long have they been together? 14 years, married for 13, Sophia replied. They met at Johns Hopkins about a year after Dad moved there from Chicago. The timeline aligned exactly with our breakup. Richard had left Chicago immediately after I'd rejected his proposal, accepting the position at Johns Hopkins he'd previously turned down to stay near me. Within a year, he'd met Elizabeth. They're disgustingly in love, Sophia continued with, the fond exasperation of a child describing parental affection. Dad still brings Mom coffee in bed every morning, and she leaves him notes in his medical journals. The domestic image was at odds with my memories of Richard. Brilliant, driven, sometimes remote. The man who'd proposed to me had been passionate about his work, about ideas, about potential. But coffee in bed and hidden notes spoke of a softer intimacy I'd never imagined him cultivating. That's sweet, I managed, taking a sip of water to hide my confusion. Successful marriages require that kind of consistent attention. Like how Noah still texts you during every meeting, Jake teased. Don't think I haven't noticed you checking your phone and smiling at budget discussions. Noah shrugged, unembarrassed. Just keeping the romance alive through quarterly projections. The easy admission of this small, tender habit between us shifted something in my chest, a reminder that while Richard had clearly built a loving relationship with Elizabeth, I had found something equally precious with Noah. Different paths, both valid, both fulfilling. The afternoon continued pleasantly, the initial awkwardness dissolving under the influence of sunshine, good conversation, and the shared experience of being on the water. Sophia proved to be intelligent, witty, and refreshingly direct, qualities that explained Jake's evident infatuation. As we sailed back toward the harbor, the Chicago skyline growing larger on the horizon, I found myself standing at the rail, beside Sophia while Noah and Jake discussed some technical aspect of the boat. I'm really glad we could do this today, she said, her gaze on the approaching city. Jake talks about you and Noah constantly. You're clearly so important to him. He's like family, I replied honestly. We want him to be happy. Sophia turned to face me then, her expression suddenly serious. Can I ask you something directly? And feel free to tell me it's none of my business. My pulse quickened, but I nodded. Of course. Were you and my dad involved when you were younger? The question was hesitant but direct, her eyes searching. Mine. I considered deflection but chose honesty instead. Yes. We were together for about 2 years, a long time ago. Sophia nodded slowly, processing. He mentioned an Olivia once when I was asking about his life before Mom, said she was brilliant and chose a different path than the one he'd planned. She paused. I didn't connect it until Jake mentioned your maiden name. It was a long time. Ego, I reiterated, uncertain what else to say. Is it weird? For you, I mean, that I'm dating Jake? Her directness was refreshing, if uncomfortable. A little, I admitted. But not because of any lingering feelings for your father. More because past and present aren't supposed to collide so directly. Sophia's laugh was unexpected. Tell me about it. When Dad realized who Jake's best friend was married to, he spent an hour pacing in their hotel room. Mom finally told him to stop being dramatic and just deal with it like an adult. The image of Richard pacing, agitated by the prospect of seeing me again, was both surprising and oddly comforting, evidence that our past had meant something to him too, that I wasn't the only one navigating complicated emotions. Well, we're all adults, I echoed my earlier words to Jake. Sometimes life presents unusual situations. We adapt. Sophia studied me for a moment, her expression thoughtful. You're exactly how Dad described you, you know. Composed, articulate, pragmatic. He described me to you? I couldn't hide my surprise. Just once when I pressed him about relationships before Mom. He said you were the most clear-minded person he'd ever known, that you always saw the straightest path to your goals and weren't afraid to take it. She smiled slightly. He meant it as a compliment, I think. Before I could process this revelation, Jake called Sophia over to help with docking procedures, leaving me to consider her words as we approached the harbor. Had Richard actually respected my decision, even as it hurt him? Had he understood my choice in ways his angry parting words hadn't suggested? As we disembarked and secured the boat, Jake proposed dinner at a nearby restaurant, a casual place known for excellent seafood and a relaxed atmosphere. Noah caught my eye, silently checking if I wanted to extend our time together. I nodded slightly. The day had been surprisingly enjoyable, the company engaging, the awkwardness less pronounced than I'd feared. Perhaps building this new relationship, with Sophia, and by extension, finding a way to peacefully coexist with Richard in our shared social circle, was actually possible. Dinner sounds great, Noah confirmed, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture of support and solidarity. As we walked toward the restaurant, I found myself between two worlds, the past I'd thought safely contained, and the present. I was still building. Yet for the first time since seeing Richard across that restaurant, I felt something like equilibrium returning. Tuesday's coffee with Richard would undoubtedly bring its own challenges, but today had shown me that perhaps the collision of past and present need not be catastrophic. Perhaps, like boats navigating changing winds, we could adjust our course. Without losing sight of our destination, Tuesday arrived with unnerving swiftness. I stood before my office window, watching Chicago's business district pulse with midday activity, while mentally reviewing the upcoming coffee meeting with Richard, as if it were a high-stakes client presentation. Your 1:30 canceled, Mia announced, entering with her tablet. And these need your signature before the end of day. She placed a folder on my desk, then hesitated. Everything okay? You seem distracted. I turned from the window, composing my features into professional neutrality. Just thinking through some strategy points for the Anderson campaign. Mia nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Your 2 p.m. is off-site. Right? At Intelligentsia? Yes, I confirmed, not elaborating. I should be back by 3. I'll hold your calls unless it's urgent, she promised before slipping out, leaving me alone with thoughts I'd been carefully compartmentalizing since the weekend sailing trip. At precisely 1:40, I gathered my things and headed out, allowing myself the luxury of walking the few blocks to Intelligentsia rather than taking a car. The June sunshine warmed my shoulders through my light blazer, a welcome counterpoint to the nervous chill that had settled in my chest. I deliberately arrived 5 minutes early, selecting a table in the corner with good sightlines to both the entrance and the street. Professional habits die hard. I wanted the tactical advantage of seeing Richard before he saw me, of having a moment to compose myself before our first one-on-one interaction in 15 years. The cafe buzzed with the familiar energy of downtown Chicago, business meetings disguised as casual coffee breaks, creative types huddled over laptops, tourists resting between architectural tours. I ordered a simple black coffee, declining the barista's suggestion of their seasonal specialty. Today called for clarity, not complications. At precisely 2 p.m., Richard walked through the door. Even expecting him, the sight sent a jolt of recognition. Through me. Not desire or regret, but something more elemental, like encountering a landscape from childhood that remains etched in memory despite years of absence. He spotted me immediately, navigating between tables with the same purposeful stride I remembered. Age had refined rather than diminished his presence, silver hair where dark had been, lines of experience framing eyes that remained sharply observant. He wore a casual button-down and slacks rather than the formal attire from our dinner encounter, yet still managed to look perfectly put together. "Olivia," he greeted me, his voice carrying that distinctive timbre that had once narrated my dreams and arguments alike. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Richard," I responded, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Would you like coffee first?" "Already ordered at the counter," he replied, settling into the seat. "Still black with no sugar, if I remember correctly?" The fact that he remembered such a detail after 15 years was both surprising and unsettling. My tastes have evolved. One sugar now. A slight smile touched his lips. Evolution is inevitable, I suppose. The barista called his name, and he excused himself to retrieve his drink. An Americano, I noted, his preference unchanged since our time together. When he returned, we sat in momentary silence, the weight of our shared past and unexpected present filling the space between us. "I imagine this situation is as surprising to you as it is to me," Richard finally said, his tone measured. "That would be an understatement," I agreed, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup. "Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world," his laugh was unexpected, short, but genuine. "Casablanca. You always did have a perfect quote for every situation." The casual reference to a shared memory threatened to pull me into nostalgia, a danger I recognized immediately. "Let's be direct. Richard, you wanted to meet. Why?" If my abruptness surprised him, he didn't show it. 2 reasons. First, practicality. Our children are dating, which means we're likely to encounter each other with some regularity. I thought it prudent to clear the air rather than navigate that tension in social settings. "Jake isn't our child," I pointed out, the phrasing striking me as odd. "No, but he's clearly family to you and Noah," Richard countered. "And Sophia is—" He paused, something softening in his expression. "Sophia is my world. Her happiness matters to me above all else." The naked sincerity in his tone revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated at our dinner encounter. Richard as a devoted father, a role I'd never witnessed during our time together. Back then, children had been theoretical future possibilities, not the center of his universe. "Jake cares for her very much," I offered, finding unexpected common ground in our concern for their relationship. "He came to my office specifically to make sure the complexity of our past wouldn't interfere." Richard nodded, taking a sip of his Americano. "Sophia asked me directly if you were the Olivia I'd mentioned from before her mother. She's always been perceptive." "She approached me during our sailing trip on Saturday," I admitted, very directly, very maturely. "That's Sophia," Richard said, pride evident in his voice. Direct questions, clear communication, no patience for ambiguity. "She gets that from you," I observed before I could stop myself. A moment of shared understanding passed between us, the recognition of how our brief chapter together had influenced the longer stories of our separate lives. "You mentioned 2 reasons," I prompted, returning to safer territory. Richard set his cup down carefully, his eyes meeting mine directly. The second is more personal. I owe you an apology, Olivia. The things I said when we ended, they were born of hurt and disappointment, not truth. The unexpected direction caught me off guard. In my memories, our ending had been sharp-edged and final. Angry words exchanged like weapons. Doors both literal and metaphorical slammed shut. That was a long time ago, I said neutrally, unsure how to navigate this sudden shift toward vulnerability. Yes, it was, Richard agreed. But time doesn't erase responsibility. I accused you of being cold, calculating, incapable of real commitment. I implied that choosing your career over marriage to me was somehow a character flaw. He shook his head slightly. I was wrong. I studied him, searching for the ulterior motive behind this unexpected mea culpa. What brought this on after 15 years? Perspective, he answered simply. Watching Sophia grow into a brilliant, ambitious woman with dreams of her own. Realizing I would never want her to compromise those dreams for anyone, not even someone who loved her. He paused. And seeing you now, successful, confident, clearly thriving in the path you chose, confirms that you made the right decision. The validation I hadn't known I still needed washed over me, unexpectedly powerful after years of having relegated our ending to an unfortunate but necessary chapter in my development. I was 24, I said quietly, just starting to understand who I was and what I wanted. Your proposal came with conditions I couldn't accept. Richard nodded, acknowledgement rather than defense in his expression. I wanted you to follow me to Johns Hopkins, to fit your ambitions around mine. I called it partnership, but it was really expectation of accommodation. Elizabeth helped me see that, years later. The mention of his wife brought me back to the present reality. She seems remarkable. She is, Richard confirmed, warmth evident in his tone. We met when she was hospital administration at Hopkins, challenging my department's resource allocation requests. Brilliant, uncompromising, and unwilling to be charmed out of doing her job properly. His smile turned reflective. She reminds me of you in some ways. The comparison might once have stung, but now it simply felt like an observation without judgment, a bridge between past and present rather than a comparison designed to hurt. Noah said something similar about Sophia. I admitted that her directness reminded him of me. We tend to recognize what we value, even when relationships change, Richard observed. Elizabeth knows all about our history, by the way, has from the beginning. She's the one who suggested I reach out for coffee. I raised an eyebrow. Your wife encouraged you to meet with your ex? Elizabeth believes in addressing complications directly. Another quality you share. He took another sip of his coffee. She pointed out that avoiding each other would only create tension that might affect Sophia and Jake's relationship. The pragmatism was admirable, if somewhat disconcerting. Noah had a similar perspective. He's been remarkably understanding about all this. He seems like a good man, Richard offered. The way he looks at you, it's clear he sees you completely and values what he sees. The observation, coming from someone who had once claimed I was impossible to truly know, carried a surprising weight. Noah understands that ambition and love aren't mutually exclusive. That supporting someone means championing their goals, not just tolerating them. Richard absorbed this without defensiveness. A lesson I learned too late for us, but thankfully in time for my marriage to Elizabeth and my relationship with Sophia. He leaned forward slightly. That's the other reason I wanted to meet Olivia. To tell you that you helped make me a better husband and father than I would have been otherwise. I blinked, genuinely taken aback. I'm not sure I follow. When you rejected my proposal, you forced me to examine why I believed my career should automatically take precedence, he explained. It was painful, but necessary. By the time I met Elizabeth, I'd learned that true partnership means mutual support and accommodation, not just expecting the other person to fit into the spaces left by your priorities. The idea that our painful ending had contributed positively to his growth was both strange and oddly healing, as if the jagged edges of that old wound had somehow produced something valuable despite the pain. "I'm glad something constructive came from it," I said finally. "Though I'd argue we both might have benefited from better communication skills back then." Richard laughed softly. "An understatement. My proposal was practically a demand disguised as an offer. And your rejection was absolute," I finished for him, remembering the clarity with which I'd recognized that accepting would mean diminishing myself in ways I couldn't bear. I wasn't gentle about it. "No, you weren't," he agreed, without rancor. But honesty, even painful honesty, is ultimately kinder than comfortable lies. Another lesson I've carried forward. We fell silent then, both perhaps revisiting that pivotal moment from the safe distance of 15 intervening years. The cafe continued its busy hum around us, oblivious to the small reconciliation taking place in its corner. "So," I said eventually, returning to our immediate reality, "where does this leave us? Friendly acquaintances who share awkward family gatherings?" "I was thinking something slightly more evolved," Richard suggested. "Perhaps people with shared history who can now appreciate each other's paths without regret or resentment. Who can coexist peacefully in social settings for the sake of those they love." The proposal, so different from his last, seemed reasonable, even appealing. A clean slate wasn't possible, but a reframed understanding might be. "I can work with that," I agreed, checking my watch. "I should head back to the office soon. Aye." "Course," Richard nodded, always respectful of professional obligations. "One more thing before you go. Elizabeth and I are hosting a small dinner party next Friday. Nothing formal, just a few colleagues and friends. We'd like to invite you and Noah, if you're available." The invitation hung between us, not just a social nicety but a deliberate step toward normalizing our unexpected connection. "I'll check with Noah, but I think we'd like that," I found myself saying, surprising both of us with my ready acceptance. Richard smiled, the expression transforming his face in ways that reminded me why I'd been drawn to him initially. "Excellent. Sophia will be pleased. She's quite taken with both of you after the sailing trip." We stood, gathering our things in the synchronized movement of people accustomed to efficient endings. As we walked toward the door, Richard asked, "How are you? Getting back to your office?" "Walking," I replied. "It's only a few blocks." "Mind if I walk with you? I'm headed in that direction anyway." The prospect of being seen walking through downtown Chicago with Richard might once have filled me with anxiety. Now it seemed merely a practical continuation of our conversation. "Not at all," I agreed. Outside, the June afternoon had warmed considerably, the sidewalks filled with the varied rhythms of urban life. We fell into step beside each other, navigating the crowd with unconscious coordination. "Your firm's in the Riverside Tower now?" Richard asked conversationally. "Yes, we moved last year, expanded to the top 3 floors." The professional accomplishment came without the need to downplay or apologize, another measure of how far we'd both come. "Impressive," he noted simply. "The Medical Research Center is just a few blocks west. State-of-the-art facilities, excellent team, different from Hopkins but stimulating in its own way." We continued in this vein, exchanging information about our professional lives with the comfortable cadence of colleagues rather than the charged tension of former lovers. By the time we reached my building, something had shifted subtly between us. Not a return to the past, but perhaps the first tentative foundations of a different kind of connection. "Thank you for meeting today," Richard said, as we paused outside the gleaming tower that housed my firm. It was clarifying. "Yes, it was," I agreed, finding it surprisingly true. "I'll talk to Noah about dinner next Friday and let you know." Richard nodded, then extended his hand formally. I accepted it, the brief contact professional rather than personal. A contract of sorts, an agreement to move forward rather than remain trapped in the amber of our past. "Until next time, Olivia," he said, releasing my hand and stepping back. "Until next time," I echoed, turning toward the revolving doors that would carry me back to my present life. As I rode the elevator to my office, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't fully recognized I was carrying. The conversation with Richard hadn't erased our history, but it had reframed it in ways that made it easier to incorporate into my present without disruption. Mia looked up as I entered, her expression curious. "Good meeting?" "Productive," I replied. Truthfully, if not completely. "Any urgent messages?" The remainder of the afternoon passed in the comfortable routine of professional obligations, but beneath my focused exterior, I was processing the unexpected turn the day had taken. By the time I headed home, I had largely accepted what earlier had seemed impossible, that Richard could become a neutral, even positive element in my life, rather than a complicated ghost from my past. Noah was working from home when I arrived, his laptop open on our kitchen island, glasses perched on his nose in the way that always made him look simultaneously more professorial and more approachable. "Hey," he greeted me, removing his glasses. "How was the coffee summit?" I set my bag down, contemplating how to summarize an encounter that had defied my expectations. "Surprisingly constructive," I said finally. "Less awkward than I anticipated." Noah closed his laptop, giving me his full attention. "Want to elaborate on surprisingly constructive?" I poured myself a glass of water, organizing my thoughts. He apologized for things he said when we ended, acknowledged that he'd been wrong to expect me to subordinate my ambitions to his, said watching Sophia grow into an ambitious woman gave him perspective. "That's mature of him," Noah observed, his expression thoughtful. "What else?" "He invited us to dinner at their home next Friday," I continued, watching Noah's reaction carefully. "A small gathering with friends and colleagues. I said I'd check with you." Noah leaned back slightly, considering. Meeting on neutral territory at a restaurant was one thing. Going to their home feels more deliberate. "I know," I acknowledged. "It's a significant step toward normalizing this unusual situation. We don't have to accept." "But you want to," Noah noted perceptively. "I can see it in your expression. You're curious." I sighed, caught in my husband's unfailing ability to read me. "I am, but not for the reasons you might think, not because of lingering feelings or nostalgia." "Then why?" His question held no judgment, only genuine interest. I considered it honestly. "Because I want to see the life he's built, the man he's become. Not out of comparison or regret, but because it helps me appreciate how completely right my choice was, both in not marrying him then and in marrying you now." Noah's expression softened. "When you put it that way, how could I possibly object?" He reached for my hand across the island. "Besides, I'm rather curious myself. The renowned Dr. Harmon in his natural habitat." The teasing note in his voice dissolved any remaining tension. "So we'll go?" "We'll go," Noah confirmed. "But I reserve the right to ask extremely technical questions about his cardiac research just to watch him try to explain complex medical concepts at a dinner party." I laughed, grateful once again for my husband's ability to find humor in situations that might overwhelm others. "Deal. Just don't be disappointed if he actually enjoys the challenge." Richard always did love explaining his work to interested audiences. Noah raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like we might have that in common. This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship, or at least a fascinating academic rivalry." The casual reference to potential friendship between my husband and my ex-boyfriend would have seemed impossible just days ago. Now, it felt like a natural extension of the strangely evolving dynamics between our interconnected lives. "There's something else," I added, moving to sit beside Noah at the island. Richard said something about me helping make him a better husband and father. That our breakup forced him to examine why he believed his career should automatically take precedence. Noah considered this. That's a remarkably self-aware perspective. Not many people can recognize how failure in one relationship contributed positively to success in another. It was validating in a way I didn't expect, I admitted, to think that even our ending served a constructive purpose. Everything teaches us something, Noah observed, his fingers lightly tracing patterns on the back of my hand. Every relationship leaves its mark, hopefully making us better for the next one. I thought about the various relationships that had shaped us both before we found each other, the lessons learned, the growth experienced, the increasing clarity about what truly mattered. Speaking of next, I said, deliberately shifting to lighter territory. Jake texted earlier. Apparently, Sophia's cooking dinner for him tomorrow night and wants to know if we'd join them. A casual double date at Jake's place. 2 social engagements with the new couple in 1 week? Noah grinned. Jake must really be serious about her. I think he is, I agreed, remembering Jake's expression when he spoke about Sophia. And honestly, I like her. Independent of who her father is, she's intelligent, direct, and seems to genuinely care for Jake. High praise from the woman who once described Jake's last girlfriend as aggressively incompatible with adult responsibility, Noah teased. That's because she tried to convince him to sell his condo and live in a converted van to find himself, I defended. Sophia at least appears to value stability and financial prudence. Truly the highest romantic compliment Olivia Sullivan can bestow, Noah laughed, pulling me closer. Financial prudence. Be still, my beating heart. I swatted his arm playfully. You knew exactly what you were getting when you married me. I believe pragmatic approach to life's challenges featured prominently in your wedding vows. Right after stunning ability to dismantle business opponents and just before adorable concentration face when reviewing contracts, Noah confirmed, his expression warm with affection. All still true, by the way. The evening settled into our comfortable routine, dinner preparation shared between us, conversation flowing easily from work to friends to plans for the weekend. The unusual developments with Richard and Sophia remained present, but not overwhelming, integrated into our life rather than disrupting it. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, Noah asked casually, "Will it be strange? Going to their home, seeing the life he built with someone else?" I paused, considering the question honestly. Perhaps a little. Not from jealousy or regret, but simply because it's a visible reminder of how completely lives can diverge from a single decision point. I turned to face him fully. But mostly, I think it will be reassuring. Concrete evidence that we both found where we were meant to be, just not with each other. Noah nodded, accepting my answer without pushing further. His security had always been one of his most attractive qualities, the unshakable confidence in himself, in us, that allowed space for honesty without fear. Besides, I added, slipping under the covers, I'm much more interested in our dinner with Jake and Sophia tomorrow. I want to see if her cooking skills match her sailing prowess. Always assessing the full skill set, Noah teased, joining me. In bed. Though I suspect Jake would be smitten even if she burned water. Probably, I agreed, thinking of how Jake had looked at Sophia on the boat, with a mixture of admiration and wonder I recognized from how Noah sometimes looked at me. He's never been this way about anyone before. Love changes us, Noah observed, simply reaching to turn off the light. Sometimes in ways we never expected. As darkness enveloped our room, I found myself contemplating the unexpected bonds forming between previously separate parts of my life, the tentative connection with Richard based on mutual respect rather than romantic history, the growing friendship with Sophia independent of her relationship to my past, the way Noah and Jake were embracing these new dynamics without reservation. Perhaps that was the most surprising development of all. Not that my ex-boyfriend had returned to my life as my husband's best friend's girlfriend's father, a connection so convoluted it almost made me laugh to formulate it. But that this bizarre twist of fate was creating connections rather than divisions, understanding rather than awkwardness. The universe's practical joke, it seemed, might actually have a punchline worth waiting for. Sophia turned out to be as skilled in the kitchen as she was on the water. The following evening at Jake's surprisingly well-appointed condo, a recent upgrade from his bachelor apartment, undertaken with subtle encouragement from Noah and me, she prepared a Mediterranean feast that would have impressed professional critics. "This is incredible," I commented, sampling a perfectly spiced lamb tagine. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Mom's a terrible cook," Sophia explained with affectionate honesty. "So Dad took over kitchen duties early in their marriage. I was his sous chef from the time I could safely hold a knife." She passed a basket of homemade flatbread. "These summers we spent in Greece visiting his colleague there helped too. Nothing teaches Mediterranean cooking like learning from actual Greek grandmothers." Another piece of Richard that I hadn't known: domestic, culinary, passing skills to his daughter through patient instruction rather than theoretical direction. The physician I'd known had been brilliant, but often impatient, more comfortable in research labs than kitchens. "Your father is full of surprises," I observed, keeping my tone light. Sophia smiled, understanding the unspoken comparison between past and present. "Mom says his best quality is his capacity for growth. Apparently, he was quite rigid when they first met. Committed to established methodologies," I offered diplomatically, remembering professional disagreements that had sometimes spilled into personal territory. "Stubborn," Sophia translated with a grin. "Mom's word, not mine. She said it took 3 years of marriage before he'd consider her input on his research approaches." Jake, returning from the kitchen with another bottle of wine, caught the end of this exchange. "Speaking of your parents, did you tell Olivia and Noah about the dinner invitation?" "I was just getting to that," Sophia said, accepting the wine. Bottle from Jake with a quick touch to his hand, a small gesture of intimacy that spoke volumes about their comfort with each other. "Dad mentioned inviting you to dinner next Friday, but I wanted to add that I'll be there too. I hope that makes it less awkward." "We're planning to attend," I confirmed, glancing at Noah, who nodded in agreement. "And having you there will be lovely." "Excellent." Sophia's enthusiasm was genuine. "Fair warning, Dad will probably corner Noah about his interest in cardiac research. He's been talking about it since your dinner at Maison." Noah grinned, seemingly pleased by this prospect. "I look forward to it. Your father's work on stem cell applications in cardiac tissue regeneration is fascinating." "Oh no, there's 2 of them," Jake groaned theatrically. "I barely understand Sophia's legal terminology. If you add medical research jargon to dinner conversation, I'm officially outnumbered by intimidating intellects." "Don't worry," Sophia reassured him, patting his hand. "Mom's normal. She'll talk to you about normal things like basketball and reality television." The casual reference to Elizabeth as normal made me curious about the woman who had succeeded where I had declined to try. The woman who had partnered with Richard through career transitions, parenthood, and apparently significant personal growth. "Your mother seems lovely," I offered sincerely. "I look forward to getting to know her better." "She's excited about that too," Sophia replied, her expression open. "She said she's been curious about you for years." I nearly choked on my wine. "Years? Why?" Sophia shrugged slightly. "Dad doesn't talk much about his past relationships, but you clearly made an impression. When he saw that Wall Street Journal profile about your firm's innovative marketing approach last year, he actually cut it out. Like, with scissors, old school style. Mom teased him about it for weeks." The image of Richard carefully clipping a newspaper article about my professional achievements, preserving it physically rather than digitally, was oddly moving, not in a romantic sense, but as evidence that he had genuinely valued my potential even after I'd rejected the future he'd offered. "I hope I live up to 15 years of curiosity," I said lightly, deflecting from the unexpected emotion the anecdote had stirred. "Just be yourself," Sophia advised. "Mom appreciates authenticity above all else. It's why she and Dad work so well. They don't pretend with each other." The simple insight into their relationship dynamic sparked recognition. It was precisely what Noah and I valued in our marriage as well. Perhaps Richard and I had been fundamentally compatible in our values after all, just misaligned in timing and execution. The evening continued pleasantly, conversation flowing easily between professional topics and personal anecdotes. I found myself genuinely enjoying Sophia's company, appreciating her quick wit and perceptive observations, independent of her connection to Richard. By the time Noah and I headed home, I had nearly forgotten the strangeness of the situation. Nearly. Forgotten that just over a week ago, Richard had been safely relegated to my past. A closed chapter rather than an ongoing presence in my life. "I like her," Noah said as we drove home, the city lights painting patterns across his thoughtful expression. "She's good for Jake, challenges him intellectually, but appreciates his emotional intelligence." "I agree," I replied, watching the familiar landmarks of our neighborhood emerge. "And I think I'm actually looking forward to dinner next Friday." "Is that strange?" Noah considered this, turning onto our street. "Not strange, just unexpected. Like everything about this situation." He glanced at me briefly. "You seem more settled about it all." "I am," I realized, the truth of it crystallizing as I spoke. Meeting with Richard helped. Seeing him as he is now rather than as I remembered him. Understanding that we've both grown in different but parallel ways. Into people who might actually like each other, Noah suggested as we pulled into our driveway. As friends rather than romantic partners. The concept would have seemed absurd 2 weeks ago. Now, it felt not just possible, but perhaps even natural. The logical evolution of a connection that had always been based on mutual respect and intellectual compatibility. Even when romantic alignment had failed. "Maybe," I acknowledged, stepping out of the car into the warm summer night. Though I reserve the right to change my mind if he starts lecturing about proper sailing techniques or criticizing my approach to client strategy. Noah laughed, joining me as we walked toward our front door. "Fair enough. Some dynamics probably haven't changed completely." As we entered our home, I found myself contemplating the unexpected bonds that were forming, not just between Noah and Richard, or Sophia and me, but between past and present, between choices made and paths taken. Connections I never would have anticipated, creating a tapestry richer and more complex than I could have imagined. The universe's practical joke, it seemed, might actually be a gift in disguise. Friday evening arrived with unusual clarity for Chicago in June. The sky a perfect azure. Temperature mild with just enough breeze to rustle the leaves of the oak trees lining Richard and Elizabeth Street in Lincoln Park. As Noah parked in front of their elegant brownstone, I found myself surprisingly calm. The anxiety that had marked our first unexpected meeting replaced by measured curiosity. "Ready?" Noah asked, reaching over to squeeze my hand briefly. "Surprisingly, yes," I replied, smoothing my dress. A deep blue sheath that projected confidence without appearing overly formal. Though I'm still processing the fact that we're voluntarily attending a dinner party at my ex-boyfriend's house, Noah grinned, cutting the engine. Just another Friday in our increasingly unusual social calendar. At least the food should be excellent, based on Sophia's cooking. The door opened before we could ring the bell, revealing Elizabeth in a simple linen dress. Her blonde hair gathered in an elegant twist that somehow managed to look both sophisticated and effortless. "Olivia, Noah," she greeted us warmly, stepping back to welcome us inside. "I'm so glad you could come. Richard's on a work call that ran long, typical Friday timing, but he'll join us momentarily. The home's interior was a perfect blend of traditional architecture and contemporary design, original crown moldings and hardwood floors complemented by modern art and streamlined furniture. Not ostentatious wealth, but the comfortable elegance of people who valued quality over display. "Your home is beautiful," I commented sincerely, as Elizabeth led us through to a spacious open kitchen and living area where other guests were already gathering. "Thank you," she replied. "It's been a labor of love since we moved back. Chicago's architectural character is so distinct from Baltimore. We wanted to honor the history while creating something that felt like us." The thoughtfulness behind the statement resonated with how Noah and I had approached our own home renovation. Another unexpected common ground. "Sophia mentioned you're in hospital administration," Noah asked as Elizabeth handed us each a glass of wine. "Healthcare systems management," she confirmed with a nod. "Less glamorous than cardiac research, but equally essential. Someone has to make sure the brilliant doctors have functioning facilities and sustainable budgets." Her tone held affectionate teasing rather than resentment, the comfortable dynamic of partners who respected each other's different but complementary roles. "The operational backbone that makes innovation possible," I observed, recognizing a kindred pragmatism. "Often underappreciated but crucial." Elizabeth's smile widened, something like recognition flickering in her eyes. "Exactly. Richard's brilliant ideas wouldn't translate to patient care without systems to implement them." She gestured toward the gathering. "Let me introduce you to the others. A mix of colleagues and friends, all warned not to talk exclusively about medicine all evening, though I make no guarantees." The next few minutes passed in a blur of introductions. Two surgeon couples, a bioethicist, and her husband who taught classics at the university, Richard's research assistant, and her partner. Everyone was welcoming without being overly curious, suggesting Elizabeth had briefed them on the somewhat unusual connection between us and our hosts. Sophia arrived moments later with Jake, immediately brightening upon seeing us. "You came!" she exclaimed, embracing me briefly before turning to Noah. "Dad's been talking about picking your brain on public interest in cardiac research applications all week." "Happy to discuss it," Noah assured her. "Though I'm strictly an interested layman, not an expert." "Sometimes those perspectives are the most valuable," came Richard's voice as he entered the room. "They remind us how to communicate beyond medical jargon." He moved through his home with comfortable authority, greeting other guests before reaching us. "Olivia, Noah, thank you for coming." His greeting was warm but appropriately casual, nothing in his manner suggesting our complicated history. "We've been looking forward to it," Noah replied easily, shaking Richard's hand, "especially after Sophia's cooking demonstration earlier this week." "Ah, she inherited my culinary tendencies," Richard said with evident pride, "though she's already surpassing her teacher in some techniques." "Dad exaggerates," Sophia interjected, though her pleased expression belied the modest words. "I still can't make his spanakopita properly." "The philo is temperamental," Richard conceded. "Takes years of practice." The casual domestic exchange offered another glimpse of this version of Richard I'd never known. The devoted father, the cooking enthusiast, the man who took pride in teaching his daughter practical skills rather than just academic excellence. Dinner was served at a long table in their garden, a space transformed into an intimate outdoor dining room with string lights casting a warm glow over the gathering. I found myself seated between Noah and the bioethicist, with Richard and Elizabeth at opposite ends of the table, the perfect balance of proximity and distance. The meal was indeed exceptional, a Mediterranean-inspired feast that confirmed Richard's culinary abilities. Conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from recent exhibitions at the Art Institute to debates about healthcare policy. Noah and Richard occasionally delved into cardiac research topics, their mutual enthusiasm, drawing others into the discussion rather than excluding them. Richard mentioned you were instrumental in developing the patient education protocol for the new cardiac regeneration therapy. The bioethicist, Dr. Chen, commented to Elizabeth during a lull in the broader conversation. I pushed for more comprehensive information sharing, Elizabeth acknowledged. Patients deserve to understand innovative treatments fully, not just be dazzled by potential outcomes. A point I resisted initially, Richard admitted from across the table. I was focused on the science rather than the experience. Elizabeth's perspective improved our approach significantly. The casual acknowledgement of her influence and his willingness to adjust his thinking offered another window into their relationship dynamic. This was partnership in its truest sense, each respecting the other's expertise, neither diminished by the collaboration. Olivia has a similar effect on my thinking, Noah observed. She asks the questions I miss because I'm too deep in the technical aspects. Perspective is invaluable. The parallel wasn't lost on anyone at the table, though no one commented directly. Instead, conversation shifted to other topics: Chicago's architectural preservation efforts, an upcoming chamber music series, Jake and Sophia's plans to train for a half marathon. As dessert was being served, a delicate orange-scented cake with fresh berries, Elizabeth caught my eye from across the table. Olivia, would you mind helping me bring out coffee? Richard made a special blend, but it's hiding somewhere in the kitchen chaos. The invitation clearly extended beyond beverage service. I nodded, excusing myself to follow Elizabeth inside, aware of the curious glances from other guests who likely sensed the significance of this private moment. The kitchen was immaculate despite Elizabeth's claim of chaos, another similarity to my own organizational tendencies. She moved with efficient grace, gathering cups and saucers while the espresso machine hummed to life. I've been hoping for a moment to speak with you directly, she said without preamble, her directness refreshing after the carefully calibrated, social interaction of the evening. I assumed as much, I replied, matching her straightforwardness. The coffee rescue seemed a bit too convenient. Elizabeth laughed, a genuine warm sound. Guilty as charged. I've found direct approaches save considerable time and confusion. She paused, considering me thoughtfully. I want to thank you. Of all the openings I might have anticipated, gratitude wasn't among them. For what exactly? For saying no to Richard 15 years ago, she replied simply, arranging cups on a tray with practiced precision. I've wanted to tell you that, since I learned about your history, I blinked, genuinely caught off guard. That's not the usual response from someone's wife regarding a previous relationship. I'm not particularly usual, Elizabeth acknowledged with a slight smile. Neither are you, from what I can tell, and neither is our situation. She measured coffee with exacting care, continuing, Richard needed to become a different man than the one who proposed to you. Your rejection, painful as it was for him then, catalyzed important growth. The assessment echoed what Richard himself had suggested during our coffee meeting, but hearing it from his wife carried different weight, confirmation that my choice had ultimately benefited not just me, but him as well. He said something similar. When we met for coffee, I admitted, though I'm still processing the idea that our breakup was somehow constructive. Elizabeth nodded understandingly. Life rarely follows linear narratives. The moments we view as failures or endings often serve purposes we can't recognize until much later. She glanced toward the garden where Richard was engaged in animated conversation with Noah and Dr. Chen. The man I married was humbled by loss, more open to partnership, more willing to question his assumptions. Your influence lingered in those changes, whether he recognized it immediately or not. There was no jealousy or insecurity in her assessment, only the clear-eyed evaluation of someone comfortable enough in her relationship to acknowledge its complex origins. I appreciate your perspective, I said finally, though I suspect who Richard is now owes far more to his years with you than to any lessons from our ending. Perhaps, Elizabeth conceded, adding the final cups to the tray. But relationships build upon each other. The man who could love me well was partly shaped by loving you differently. She looked at me directly then. I hope you don't find this conversation uncomfortable. I've simply wanted to acknowledge this connection rather than pretend it doesn't exist. I prefer directness, I assured her, and I appreciate your openness, especially given the circumstances. Richard said you valued straightforward communication, Elizabeth noted with approval. Another quality we share, it seems. She lifted the coffee tray. Shall we rejoin the others before they send a search party? As we returned to the garden, I found myself studying Elizabeth with new appreciation, not just as Richard's wife or Sophia's mother, but as a woman of remarkable self-possession and emotional intelligence. In another context, another timeline, we might have been friends independent of our connection through Richard. Perhaps we still could be, despite that connection, rather than because of it. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, dessert, giving way to coffee and conversation that stretched later than initially planned, always the mark of a successful gathering. When we finally began making our farewells shortly after 11, I found myself genuinely reluctant to leave, rather than relieved the obligation was complete. This was lovely, I told Elizabeth sincerely as she walked us to the door. Thank you for including us. The first of many, I hope, she replied. Especially if Jake and Sophia continue on their current trajectory. Her glance toward the young couple was knowing, the assessment of someone who recognized serious intention when she saw it. Richard joined us at the door, his expression relaxed in a way I didn't remember from our time together. Noah, we should continue our discussion about public education on regenerative therapies. Perhaps lunch next week? I'd like that, Noah agreed without hesitation. The nascent friendship between them seemed entirely natural now, their shared intellectual interests transcending the unusual circumstances of their connection. As Richard and Elizabeth said goodbye to the other departing guests, Sophia approached, us with Jake at her side, their hands linked comfortably. Thank you for coming, she said warmly. It means a lot, to all of us. Her gesture encompassed her parents as well as herself, acknowledging the deliberate effort everyone was making to navigate this unexpected intersection of lives. We enjoyed ourselves, I assured her truthfully. Your family is lovely. They are, she agreed, glancing back at her parents with obvious affection. And they're trying very hard to be cool about all this. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Mom actually made Dad practice casual conversation topics before you arrived. The image of Richard rehearsing small talk to ensure my comfort was both amusing and oddly touching, evidence of how seriously he took this new dynamic between us. The effort is appreciated, I said, smiling. Though perhaps less necessary than they might think. Jake squeezed Sophia's hand, his expression reflecting the significance he placed on this developing connection between the important people in his life. We're heading to that new jazz club downtown. Care to join us? The invitation was genuine but not pressured, an option rather than an expectation. Noah glanced at me, silently deferring to my preference. Another time, I suggested. It's been a full evening and we have early morning plans tomorrow. The excuse was polite rather than evasive, evidence of how much had changed in just 2 weeks. What had initially seemed an impossible complication now felt increasingly natural, if still somewhat unusual. As Noah and I drove home through Chicago's Friday night bustle, a comfortable silence settled between us, the quiet of shared understanding, rather than unspoken tension. Well, Noah said finally as we approached our neighborhood. That was surprisingly enjoyable. It was, I agreed, watching familiar landmarks pass outside the window. Elizabeth is remarkable. She and Richard seem well matched, Noah observed. Different expressions of similar values. The assessment was astute, capturing what I'd observed throughout the evening. Two strong individuals who complemented rather than compromised each other, who had built something substantial together without diminishing their individual identities. They do, I acknowledged. It's illuminating. Noah glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. Illuminating how? I considered the question, trying to articulate the clarity that had been gradually forming since our first, unexpected encounter with Richard. It confirms that relationships aren't about finding the right person in some absolute sense, but about finding the right person for who you are and who you want to become. Noah nodded thoughtfully as we pulled into our driveway. Richard wasn't wrong for wanting what he wanted 15 years ago. He was just wrong for you at that point in your life. Exactly, I said, relief washing through me at his perfect understanding. And I wasn't wrong for refusing to compromise my ambitions. I was just wrong for him. We sat in the car for a moment, the engine off, streetlights casting gentle shadows across the dashboard. Noah turned to face me fully. Are you okay? With all of this, Richard and Elizabeth becoming part of our social circle, Sophia and Jake, getting serious, these worlds colliding. The concern in his voice warmed me, his consistent prioritization of my comfort and well-being, even as he formed his own connections within this unusual situation. I am, I replied, the truth of it settling comfortably around me. It's not what I would have chosen or expected, but it's interesting, maybe even valuable in ways I didn't anticipate. Noah smiled, reaching for my hand. Life's most meaningful developments rarely come in the packages we expect. As we entered our home, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey of the past 2 weeks, from shock and discomfort to this emerging equilibrium where past and present existed not in conflict, but in conversation with each other. The universe's practical joke had revealed its purpose, not to destabilize my carefully constructed life, but to deepen it, to add dimension through unexpected connections, to demonstrate how completely right my choices had been, even as I acknowledged the validity of different paths. Later that night, as Noah slept peacefully beside me, I found myself awake, mind still processing the evening's revelations. I slipped quietly from bed and moved to the window overlooking our garden, Chicago's ambient glow providing just enough light to outline familiar shapes in the darkness. My phone showed a text received while we were driving home. From Elizabeth. Not Richard. Enjoyed meeting you properly tonight. Brunch sometime, just us? There's an excellent place near the hospital. The invitation was straightforward, woman to woman. No mention of Richard or our unusual connection. Just a simple proposal of friendship, independent of our shared history. I typed a response without hesitation. I'd like that. Next Saturday? Her reply came almost immediately, suggesting she too was awake despite the late hour. Perfect. 11 a.m. At Maple and Ash. Looking forward to it. I set the phone down, smiling slightly at this newest, unexpected development. A friendship forming not despite complicated circumstances, but perhaps because of them. Built on mutual recognition of shared qualities. Noah stirred, half waking as I returned to bed. Everything okay? He murmured, reaching for me instinctively. Everything's fine, I assured him, settling back beside him. Just making plans with Elizabeth. He acknowledged, already drifting back toward sleep. Like her, smart, direct. Reminds me of you. His observation, offered in semi-consciousness, echoed what I'd been thinking, the recognition of kindred spirits across unlikely circumstances. As sleep finally claimed me, I found myself contemplating the strange geometry of human connection, how lives intersect and diverge, how relationships transform across time, how endings sometimes circle back to new beginnings in forms we could never have anticipated. My husband's best friend was dating my ex-boyfriend's daughter. My ex-boyfriend's wife was becoming my friend. My husband was forming an intellectual bond with the man I'd once thought I might marry. And somehow, improbably, it all made perfect sense. 2 months later, on a perfect August evening, Noah and I hosted a dinner party in our backyard, string lights mirroring the ones in Richard and Elizabeth's garden, table set with the casual elegance that had become our entertaining signature. Jake and Sophia arrived first, bringing wine and the easy familiarity of people who had become regular fixtures in our lives. Richard and Elizabeth followed shortly after, Elizabeth carrying a homemade dessert, Richard a book he'd promised to lend Noah about recent advances in non-invasive cardiac procedures. As I welcomed them into our home, the space Noah and I had, built together, the physical manifestation of the life we'd chosen, I experienced a moment of surreal clarity. This unexpected collision of past and present had transformed into something valuable, something enriching rather than disrupting. Elizabeth joined me in the kitchen as I finished preparing appetizers, falling naturally into helping without being asked. Our brunch had led to coffee meetings, to shared interests, to a friendship that existed independently of our connection through Richard. Jake asked for my mother's engagement ring last week, she mentioned quietly, arranging olives on a serving plate. Family heirloom. He's planning to propose next month during their weekend in Michigan. The news wasn't entirely surprising. Jake and Sophia had grown increasingly serious over the summer, but the implications rippled through me nonetheless. A proposal, a potential marriage, would cement our unusual connection permanently. Noah suspected as much, I replied, smiling. Jake's been uncharacteristically interested in investment strategies lately. Classic pre-proposal financial panic. Elizabeth laughed softly. Richard's been giving him impromptu lectures on long-term financial planning. Poor Jake looks simultaneously terrified and grateful. Through the kitchen window, I could see the men in the garden, Noah and Richard deep in conversation by the grill, Jake arranging chairs with careful attention to Sophia's instructions. The scene was utterly domestic, utterly ordinary, and yet extraordinary in its unlikely composition. "Are you okay with it?" Elizabeth asked perceptively. "This potential formalization of our connection?" I considered the question honestly. 2 months ago, the prospect might have seemed overwhelming, too much collision between carefully separated parts of my life. Now, it felt natural, even right. "I am," I assured her. "They're good together, and we've managed to create something rather remarkable out of an initially awkward situation, don't you think?" Elizabeth's expression warmed with understanding. Life rarely follows the paths we anticipate. The most meaningful connections often arise from the most unexpected circumstances. As we carried appetizers out to the garden, joining our unlikely, assembled family, I found myself filled with a profound appreciation for life's unpredictability, for the way seeming complications can resolve into connections, for the way endings can transform into different kinds of beginnings, for the way the universe sometimes knows exactly what we need before we ourselves recognize it. My husband's best friend was dating, and soon would be engaged to, my ex-boyfriend's daughter. My ex-boyfriend had become my husband's friend. His wife had become mine. And somehow, in the mysterious algebra of human relationships, it all added up to something more complete than I could have imagined. A life enriched rather than complicated. By unexpected connections, by bridges between past and present, by the strange and wonderful ways that lives intersect across time. As we gathered around the table, Richard raising a glass in a toast to friendship and connection, I caught Noah's eye across the gathering. His smile held understanding, appreciation, and a touch of amused wonder at the unlikely path that had led us here. I returned the smile, lifting my glass to join the toast, grateful for the complicated, unpredictable, perfectly imperfect tapestry of human connection that had transformed what once seemed a cosmic joke into one of life's most unexpected gifts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.